Hello and welcome to Unacademy, a one stop destination for the English medium civil services aspirants. A very good morning and welcome to the most comprehensive Hindu analysis on YouTube. So let's begin the discussion by first looking at the topics that we are going to discuss. On the front page of the Hindu, we have a couple of important articles that we are going to discuss today. And along with that, we have some important editorials and columns and few other small topics. So, in total, I have chosen 9 articles for a detailed discussion so that you don't have to go back and read the newspaper again. But before we start, I have a very important announcement. UPSC aspirants who are preparing for Prelims 2026 and beyond, if you're looking to attempt a full length practice test and if you want to compare your performance with other students across the country, you have a great opportunity this Sunday on 23rd November because Unacademy is conducting the Civil Services Championship Test, the largest such championship test for civil services aspirants. So, by attending the test, you not only get to test your preparation and compare your performance with other peers and get a All India rank, but you also stand a chance to win attractive rewards and a scholarship for our IAS courses. So, those interested, please click on the link provided in the description, and the test will be held in 2 slots. You can take up any one of these slots either at 11 a.m. or at 5 p.m. And if you want the PDF of the session, please join our official Telegram channel. After the session ends, the PDF would be shared over here. So let's begin the discussion and look at this important article on page number 10. This article helps us understand the evolution of anti rape laws in the country. This article refers to one of the most horrific incidents of rape in the country, a landmark moment that eventually transformed the criminal landscape with regard to the legal system and the criminal justice system. So, this particular incident in the 1970s, it led to the evolution of a new set of legal framework against rape in order to protect Indian women. So, this is a very important and a sensitive topic. So, let's start from the very beginning. See, recently, Chief Justice of India, B.R. Gavai, referred to this particular case, Tukaram versus State of Maharashtra. This particular case, the Supreme Court had delivered the judgment in 1979. Back in 1979, the Supreme Court had dealt with Tukaram versus State of Maharashtra. So this case was related to the Mathura rape case, a tragic incident that had unfolded in tribal Maharashtra in 1972. So in this particular incident, a tribal girl, a teenage girl, she had been raped by policemen in the police station itself. A horrific case of custodial rape had taken place. So after several years, instead of securing justice to the rape victim, the Supreme Court acquitted the accused despite the availability of evidence. The Supreme Court committed a grave institutional blunder in acquitting the accused in Tukaram versus State of Maharashtra. So recently, Chief Justice of India, B.R. Gavai, referred to this ruling of the Supreme Court and called it an institutional embarrassment to the higher judiciary. The very institution which was supposed to protect the constitutional rights of the victim and ensure that justice was delivered had contributed to the derailment of justice. So, this wrong judgment of the Supreme Court in the Tukaram case related to the Mathura rape was widely criticized. It triggered a huge uproar across the country in 1979 1980. It triggered a set of changes in our legal system, and it continues to have an effect even today. So, in a way, it is the equivalent of the Banwari rape case that led to the Vishaka guidelines that deals with protection of women at workplace against sexual harassment. It is the equivalent of the Nirbhaya gang rape case, which led to big transformation in our criminal laws. In fact, all these changes that have happened in 1980s, 1990s, and in the last 2 decades, they all trace their origin to this incident, the Mathura rape of 1972, and the wrong judgment of the Supreme Court in 1979, where the accused were acquitted. So, first, let's look at the details of this particular case. The details are very, very important because it helps you understand some key concepts. So, as I said, in this incident, a tribal girl was the victim. So, in 1972, members of a tribal community in Maharashtra, they had been picked up by the police for further investigation and interrogation in a particular matter. So, a group of members of this tribal community, they were called to the police station, and in this group of tribal people, the victim eventually was also part of this group who was summoned to the police station. So, after asking some questions, the policemen sent back all the members of the community, but they asked this girl to stay back in the police station. Now, this itself was a violation of established rules. Women cannot be summoned to police station without the adequate protocols being followed. And this was in a completely different matter. So there was no need for this girl to be kept at the police station by the police while they sent back the other members of the community. So in 1978, the Supreme Court had passed a ruling in this regard in the Nandini Satpathy case that there is no need for the police to interrogate and question a woman at police stations. Instead, this should be done at the residence of the woman to ensure that there is no case of custodial abuse or exploitation. So, in violation of the established procedure, the police had forced this girl to stay back at the police station while they sent back all the other members of the community. And during that night, the head constable and the constable at the police station ended up raping the victim of the Mathura rape case. So, this was a case of custodial rape. So, this case eventually reached the doorsteps of the courts. So, at the trial court, the sessions judge, who was highly biased, influenced by patriarchal mindset, he had declared that the accused are innocent, though evidence was available to establish rape. In fact, this judge at the trial court level ended up shaming the victim, blaming the victim, and accusing the victim of being accustomed to having sexual relations. So, in a way, the victim was being called a liar. The victim was being shamed by the court itself, and the accused were acquitted by the trial court. So, this was driven by pure patriarchy. The matter reaches the Bombay High Court. The Bombay High Court overturns this ruling of the trial court and it holds the accused guilty. So, this was supposed to bring relief to the victim, secure justice to the victim. But eventually, the matter reaches the Supreme Court, Tukaram versus State of Maharashtra. And in 1979, the Supreme Court upholds the judgment of the trial court and overturns the ruling of the Bombay High Court. The Supreme Court argued that since there was no sign of a physical injury or resistance by the girl, this can't be treated as rape. The Supreme Court acknowledged that the sexual act had taken place at the police station. That itself should have invited action against these corrupt policemen because of their unprofessional conduct. But that aside, the Supreme Court was essentially blaming it on the victim again. That this involved consent. Since there was no injury marks on the victim, Supreme Court was presuming that the victim had consented to this sexual relationship with these two policemen, and hence these accused were acquitted. In fact, this case did not attract much attention in the initial years. After the horrific ruling of the Supreme Court, four intellectuals, they wrote a letter to the Supreme Court. They urged the Supreme Court to go out to rural areas and tribal belt and experience the suffering of the poor people, how they are abused by the system, especially by the police. And this letter triggered a huge media uproar that brought about outrage amongst the public, leading to large scale outrage across the country. If not for this letter highlighting the issue and media picking up the story, this case would have been buried again. So post 1979, a lot of focus came upon the Mathura rape case and this erroneous judgment of the Supreme Court. So in this letter, the four intellectuals, you can see the names given here in the article, they highlight the concept of consent and its linkage with submission. Because Supreme Court's ruling, when it acquitted the accused, was entirely based on the fact that the victim had submitted herself to this sexual relationship at the police station, meaning consent had been provided. So the intellectuals, they break down the concept in this letter addressed to the judges of the Supreme Court that when consent is granted, it means you're submitting yourself. Correct. But vice versa is not true. When you're being forced to submit yourself, doesn't mean consent has been obtained. Doesn't mean it is consensual relationship. Please understand the police, they were in a place of authority. What will a innocent, a tribal teenage girl do against these policemen? And by the way, she was an orphan as well, from a very poor community, an orphaned teenage girl, forced to stay back at the police station and raped by these two constables. So, how would this girl with limited knowledge, limited awareness, who would be scared of the police station, scared of the police, resist any of these advances by the policemen? So she would have submitted herself, but that does not mean she had consented to this sexual act. And the Supreme Court back in 1979 failed to see this link. So that's the reason why Chief Justice of India B.R. Gavai referred to this erroneous ruling of the Supreme Court as an institutional embarrassment to the judiciary itself. Because the institution that was supposed to protect constitutional rights and secure justice to the victim had not only derailed justice, it had acquitted the accused and it was blaming the victim. It was assuming the victim had consented to the sexual act just because she had submitted to it, but completely ignoring the fact that she would be forced and threatened by those in a position of power. A powerless girl would have never been able to stand up against these policemen. So, this incident led to a series of changes in India's criminal landscape, in our judicial framework. It led to several changes in the criminal laws. In 1980s, the Criminal Law Amendment Act was brought out. So, for the first time, custodial rape was recognized as a punishable offense. It was delineated as a separate offense. The Criminal Law Amendment Act 1983 led to the identification of custodial rape as a standalone offense. It led to significant changes in dowry laws, in Family Courts Act, and it went on to inspire changes related to Vishaka guidelines and the changes that have happened post the Nirbhaya gang rape incident. So, if you look at the evolution of anti rape laws in India, it all goes back to this particular incident, the Mathura rape case, and the erroneous judgment of Supreme Court in 1979. So, in 1990s, we saw a major reform through the Vishaka guidelines that were introduced by the Supreme Court. In the Vishaka case, Panwari, a government mid nurse and auxiliary wife, who was basically acting as a local activist against child marriage, was raped at her workplace. The matter reached the court, and eventually Supreme Court brought out guidelines against sexual harassment at workplace that led the government to bring out a law that today protects women against sexual harassment at workplace. So you can see the ripple effect that the Mathura rape incident had on India's criminal justice landscape. The kind of changes that have taken place. For example, today, rape is punishable by death. The Nirbhaya gang rape incident was another landmark moment that led to the establishment of the Justice J.S. Verma Committee by the then Manmohan Singh government. Based on recommendations of J.S. Verma Committee, changes were introduced into the criminal laws, into the Indian Penal Code and other related legislations through the Criminal Amendment Act. So, now rape, in case of repeat offenders, can attract a death penalty. and if rape results in the victim being pushed into a vegetative state, which happened in the case of Nirbhaya. In such cases where brutal violence is used against the victim, which could push the victim into a vegetative state, then death punishment can be invoked. Age of consent has increased from 16 to 18 years. Then various forms of rape is accounted for, not just penile vaginal intercourse, but even other forms of rape is accounted for today. Insertion of an object, for example, which we again saw in the horrific Nirbhaya incident. So the very definition of rape and sexual intercourse has expanded. The concept of consent has expanded. And today, the laws have become gender neutral. We discussed the same topic yesterday. When it comes to sexual offenses against children, against women, both victims and the offenders, the law treats them in a gender neutral manner. So a lot of transformative changes have taken place. Then recently we had other horrific rape incidents, the Unnao and Kathua rape cases, where those in position of power, including a well-known MLA, was involved. So these horrific cases have led to significant changes in our criminal laws. Today, the Bharatiya Nyaya Sanhita incorporates all these changes and provides for an effective framework to protect women against these horrific sexual offenses. So this is what we learn from this important article. And I hope you're aware that through the Criminal Law Amendment Act 2018, rape against a minor girl who is under the age of 12 years will attract death punishment. Then rape against a minor girl who is under the age of 16 will attract a minimum of 20 years of imprisonment. So stringent punishments have been provided, fast track courts have been set up. Courts have issued directions to the police and law enforcement agencies to speed up the investigation, to rely on scientific methods of investigation. And the focus is on protecting the victim, respecting the victim's honor, not shaming the victim. So, despite all these laws being present, these guidelines being present, you answer this question honestly. Do women in the country feel safe despite having a formidable legal framework? The answer is most likely no. And that is because the mindset has not changed in our society. The patriarchy that contributes to this has not been addressed. So, unless and until the society reforms, unless and until boys are taught to behave, unless and until the society learns the concept of consent, this is unlikely to change, even though you have the best laws possible, the best justice system possible. So, this is a very important lesson that you draw from this article. So, based on this, take up a practice question. The Mathura rape case led to a myriad of anti rape laws, yet, women in India continue to feel unsafe. Illustrate. I think we have discussed this article in great detail, so you should be able to draw the points from our discussion and build a good answer for this particular question. I urge all of you to take this very seriously because answer writing is critical for you to clear this exam. Mains is all about presenting your viewpoints, presenting your analysis on these critical issues. So please use our in depth discussions and the pointers that we have discussed and the structure that I have followed so that you can replicate that in the answer. So please write your answers and try to post them in the comments as well so it can help other students. Now let's look at the next article on page number 8. Syed Akbaruddin, a former Indian diplomat from the Indian Foreign Service. He also served as India's permanent representative to the United Nations. He was also the spokesperson of the Ministry of External Affairs. He writes a detailed and very insightful article on India's relations with Africa. So let's dive into this topic and understand India-Africa relations. Why there is a lot of potential in this relationship and what mistakes has India done with regard to its African diplomacy. What can be done in the future to correct some of the mistakes that India has committed. Because see, Africa is a region which cannot be ignored by any country. As you all know, Africa is a continent that's blessed with resources, from hydrocarbons to uranium to gold to critical minerals and rare earth elements, and large tracts of agricultural land. So, Africa is blessed with immense natural resources. Today, the continent has a population of more than 1 billion, and it comprises of a very young demography. In the coming years, Africa would be one of the youngest regions in the world in terms of its demography, comprising of primarily youth population. But unfortunately, Africa has been historically exploited, first by the colonial imperial powers, then by the Western countries, and today by all the major powers, including China. Be it United States, be it the European powers, be it Russia, be it China. All their investments in Africa are driven by the need for grabbing Africa's resources and mineral wealth. So it's driven by the motive of exploitation. So this results in multiple wars and conflicts in Africa. It results in military coups, constant political instability, and the backwardness of the region, the lack of development, is directly contributing to very poor educational and health indicators. The standard of living is something that directly affects the population of Africa. So, this is where India can act as a great stabilizing force. Because unlike China, unlike Western powers, India doesn't have a selfish motive when it comes to Africa. Of course, we have interests, but it's not a selfish motive that we have. India believes in building a mutually beneficial partnership. We don't believe in exploitative relations. We don't believe in a one sided relationship. This has been a hallmark of Indian diplomacy. India has done a lot for Africa in the past, right from supporting the decolonization of Africa. Prime Minister Nehru was a very strong champion of decolonization of Africa. India took up this issue at the United Nations, gave a voice to the voiceless African countries. We helped many African nations achieve political stability in their transition to a democracy. We together championed the non aligned movement. India took a stand against the horrific apartheid culture of South Africa and supported the anti apartheid movement led by Nelson Mandela. India has invested a lot of resources, capital, and effort into Africa to harness a good relationship out of it. Because, see, historically, India is very close to Africa, even geologically, geographically. Geographically, we are linked through the Indian Ocean. Since ancient medieval times, merchants, traders from India, from the subcontinent, have been engaging with eastern and southern parts of Africa. You have historical records to establish that. Then, geologically, both India and Africa are connected. Historically, we are linked. Culturally, we are connected. So, it's only natural for India to explore those ties and build a new age partnership that is focused on mutual benefits. India has done quite a lot. India has provided lines of credit, LOC, which is a type of a concessional loan. Several billions dollars worth of LOCs have been provided by India to fund infrastructure and development projects in Africa. India has given these concessional loans to help several countries, especially in Eastern and Southern Africa, today in Western parts of Africa as well, to help in the development of these countries. And one of the biggest initiatives of India when it comes to Africa was the launch of the India Africa Forum Summit, the IAFS. This was a pet project of then Prime Minister Manmohan Singh. It was launched in 2008. The first summit between India and Africa was held in close coordination with African Union and other regional sub-regional groupings of Africa. So several countries of the African Union were invited for the India Africa Forum Summit, and since then we have been stepping up our African diplomacy. India held the second India Africa Forum Summit in 2011. Then in 2015, the third India Africa Forum Summit was organized by the Modi government. In fact, in 2015, all the 54 African Union countries were invited. in a major step. Because in previous editions, only few select countries were being invited on a turn by turn basis. But for the first time during the 2015 India Africa Forum Summit, all the member countries of African Union, all the 54 African states were invited. So until then, India was doing everything right with regard to Africa. I hope you know that India has been the backbone of Africa's healthcare system, be it the supply of generic drugs and vaccines, or the investments of Indian pharma companies, Indian hospital chains across Africa. So, India's healthcare ecosystem is the backbone of Africa's healthcare ecosystem. India has invested heavily in education in Africa. You might have heard of the Pan African E Network project. This, this was a brainchild of then President APJ Abdul Kalam. When President APJ Abdul Kalam was visiting African countries, he saw the immense human suffering, the lack of healthcare and education, and he proposed the idea that India could use ISRO's communication satellites to deliver telemedicine and tele-education services. So this idea was acted upon by the Ministry of External Affairs through this soft power initiative, which we today call as Pan-African E-Network project. So India linked ISRO satellites with the satellite terminals, receiving terminals on the ground, laid OFC cables as well, and provided the necessary infrastructure to multiple African nations to access Indian satellite networks to avail telemedicine and tele-education services by connecting African patients with Indian hospitals, Indian doctors, by connecting African students with Indian universities, Indian colleges. So this has been one of our landmark soft power initiative, which has been highly successful. India has even rolled out scholarships through the ICCR, the Indian Council for Cultural Relations, has been playing a pivotal role in giving out scholarships to African students to build closer cultural links between the two sides. Through the ITEC program, the Indian Technical and Economic Cooperation, India has been helping in capacity building and training programs. India provides training to bureaucrats, diplomats, police officers, military officers from African nations. We train their banking sector, their IT sector as well. So many such initiatives, training programs are run and organized. They're all focused on educating the youth, skilling the youth, and empowering them and making them ready for the job sector. So India has done quite a lot. But the writer points out that the last decade, we have seen the decline of the momentum in India Africa relations because it has been 10 years since the last India Africa Forum Summit. Though India has some big investments which have been made in the last 10 years, diplomatically, the focus has declined, the momentum has gone down. India Africa Forum Summit was the pivotal platform which was allowing India to engage with all the African nations simultaneously. So, not holding a single summit in 10 years has been a costly mistake on India's part. But India has opened 17 new missions in African nations in the last decade, especially in western part of Africa, which was largely neglected. India has opened new consulates, new embassies, and high commissions, stepping up our diplomatic presence. Then recently, we have organized a massive military exercise called IKIMI, Africa India Key Maritime Engagement. I hope you have heard about this. I've covered this in my current affairs classes. Earlier this year, Indian Navy participated in a multilateral naval exercise with 9 African navies, primarily from east and southern part of Africa. This included countries such as South Africa, Kenya, Tanzania, Mozambique, Seychelles, Madagascar, Mauritius, Comoros. All these countries were part of this major maritime naval engagement, which has promoted our strategic and military presence as well in the region. Today, our relations with Africa is not just limited to the economic aspect or the developmental aspect. It has transitioned to the strategic military domain as well. So, though India has been doing quite well, the fact that India has not held the India Africa Forum Summit is a big setback for our African diplomacy. That's what the writer is pointing out. See, India did very well by launching the Voice of the Global South Summit as India was preparing to host the 2023 G20 summit. In the run up to the 2023 G20 summit, India organized the Voice of Global South summit and gave a voice to the voiceless countries from the global south. And this primarily included African nations. So now we have held multiple editions of Voice of Global South Summit, and this is a right step from India's side to focus on the developing, underdeveloped countries, especially in Africa. India pushed for membership for African Union at G20. African Union was included as the 21st member of G20 group because of India's efforts, because of India's insistence. So though India has these achievements in the last decade, the point that we have not organized another India Africa Forum summit points towards a diplomatic lacuna in our foreign policy towards Africa. Because China is marching ahead. Today, India has investments in ports, in power projects, in railway projects. India has really stepped up bilateral engagement. For example, in the last few months itself, Prime Minister Modi has visited multiple African nations, including Ghana, Nigeria, Namibia, and the others. President Murmu, just a few days ago, has visited Botswana and other African nations. So, individually, we are engaging with these countries through bilateral format. But not reviving the India Africa Forum Summit has been a big mistake on the part of Indian diplomacy. That's why the writer is suggesting the way forward. The way forward should focus on three steps. One, we need to ensure that we maintain the financial commitments, the investment commitments that we have made, and ensure there is a constant flow of capital towards Africa, focusing on developmental projects, on health, education. Because see, today thousands of African students are studying in India. African companies are interconnected with Indian companies. Indian companies have big investments in Africa. So, if we have to take forward these economic links and cultural people to people relations, finance will play a critical part. India eventually, right, would be third largest economy, and India would need the complementary resources of Africa, not just the mineral wealth and the geographical resources, but the human talent, the skills of African workers in the coming decades would be pivotal for India's rise, for India's growth. Africa would be crucial for India's food security, given the vast tracts of agricultural land in Africa. So, finance is something that India has to step up and maintain. Second, establishing digital connectivity through a digital corridor. India has been rolling out UPI and India Stack, which is the digital public infrastructure that India has built. For example, India is rolling out UPI in countries like Ghana and Nigeria. So, India would do well to further interconnect the digital payment systems and interconnect our public service delivery infrastructure as well. So, bringing technology as a linking factor, sharing technology like clean renewable energy with African nations. Through International Solar Alliance, India is already trying to do this. We are assisting African nations to invest in solar and other forms of clean renewable energy. So, going forward, India will have to consider other forms of connectivity, maybe establishing pipelines for transporting green hydrogen, ammonia, cleaner forms of fuel. Then, finally, there has to be an institutional framework. You need to revive the India Africa Forum Summit. Along with focus on finance and technology, there should be a revival of the institutional mechanism, which is the India Africa Forum Summit. See, we do have good links. We have regular engagement individually with each country at a bilateral level. We are even working with regional groups. For example, within Africa, there is an economic community called ECOWAS, the Economic Community of West African States. Recently, India has given $40 million as a concessional loan to the ECOWAS community. So, though we are doing well bilaterally and at these smaller regional groups, it's important to engage the entire continent. And we already had an initiative which has been sidelined in the last decade. So, the writer is urging the government to revive this format and hold regular engagement because China is doing it. China has a similar regular engagement with African nations, and it takes place every 2 years without fail. In fact, India Africa Forum Summit was modeled on China's initiative with African nations. Even during COVID lockdowns, China managed to hold a virtual summit with all the African countries. So there's no reason for India to stop this engagement. The writer is urging that this institutional framework has to be revived at the earliest. So based on this, take up a mains practice question and please use this for your answer writing practice. Now coming to the next topic, a very big development from our neighboring country, from our eastern neighbor, Bangladesh. Former Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina, who has been exiled, who has sought asylum in India, who's currently under India's protection at an undisclosed location in Delhi. She has been convicted of crimes against humanity and she has been awarded the death penalty. She was tried by the ICT, the International Crimes Tribunal. She, along with her then Home Minister, both were tried for the large scale violence that was seen in Bangladesh in 2024. In July August 2024, when widespread protests broke out against Sheikh Hasina's rule that led to the toppling of her regime, that led to her expulsion from the country. During those violent protests in 2024, Bangladeshi security forces and police had used a lot of force, disproportionate force against the protesters, leading to the killing of hundreds of protesters in the country. So these cases were tried by the International Crimes Tribunal, which is set up by Bangladesh. And Sheikh Hasina and her Home Minister have been held guilty of these crimes and they have been awarded the death punishment. Now, let's quickly break this down. What does this mean for Bangladesh? What does this mean for India? The point number one, the International Crimes Tribunal, which today has convicted Sheikh Hasina, was in fact set up by Sheikh Hasina herself back in 2009. Sheikh Hasina, when she was campaigning in 2008 elections, she had promised that if she is elected to power, if her party Awami League is brought to power, she had made an electoral promise to set up a crimes tribunal to try the war criminals of 1971. I hope all of you are familiar with the history of Bangladesh, how Bangladesh was East Pakistan and the West Pakistani elite and the Pakistani army had committed brutal atrocities against the Bengalis, killing to a genocide where lakhs of Bengalis were slaughtered. So eventually, Bangladesh fought for its independence. It was aided and supported by India. India went to war with Pakistan and ensured the liberation of Bangladesh. So many years later, when Sheikh Hasina came back to power, she had promised to try these war criminals who had committed those brutal atrocities, that genocide against the Bengalis. And after coming to power in 2009, she had established the International Crimes Tribunal. So this tribunal had tried these alleged war criminals who were colluding with the then Pakistani army to commit those atrocities. So most of those members, they were part of Jamaat-e-Islami, of right-wing extremist organization in Bangladesh. So when the ICT had tried these war criminals, some of them were given life imprisonment, some of them were awarded death punishment as well. So this was appreciated by the supporters of Sheikh Hasina, the nationalist elements in Bangladesh, the pro-India faction in Bangladesh. But however, it also attracted a lot of criticism. Many experts, even neutral observers from other countries, they saw this as political retribution. They saw this as a move of Sheikh Hasina to crush her political opponents by using the tribunal as an excuse. So eventually, it's the same tribunal today which is convicting Sheikh Hasina. That shows that the trials of the tribunal may not be based on the principles of justice, and it might have been more influenced by the politics in Bangladesh. So eventually, Sheikh Hasina grew unpopular as well, though she turned around the country's economy and she addressed India's security concerns and border security challenges. She was a great friend for India. But despite that, she grew to be an unpopular leader and also displayed some authoritarian tendencies. There were allegations of election manipulation, electoral rigging. Uh, there was a lot of criticism against the way she handled political criticism, be it the Bangladesh Nationalist Party, the main political rival, or be it radical forces like Jamaat-e-Islami and other Islamic fundamentalists. Sheikh Hasina would target them. And this was seen as political targeting, which led to accusations of she being an authoritarian ruler. Right? It is this unpopularity which eventually spilled over into the protests and led to the toppling of her regime. So today, the trial, of course, is largely a sham. Of course, large scale killings took place during 2024 protests and riots. But again, to hold just Sheikh Hasina responsible for that and deliver the death penalty, it may basically ignore the principles of natural justice. But again, this has implications for India because right now, Sheikh Hasina is under India's protection. When she fled Bangladesh, she took shelter in India, given that Sheikh Hasina and her family have always had close ties with India. India has a history of protecting Sheikh Hasina and her family. So India took her in and gave asylum. And today, this creates a dilemma for India. Because, see, on one side, we are seeing Bangladesh slip away towards radicalism and extremism. We have seen a lot of violence against religious minorities, including Hindus. We have seen the rise of terrorist activities, which poses a threat to India. There are alarming reports of a Bangladeshi link to the recent Delhi bomb blasts. Pakistan and China have been exploiting this opportunity. Bangladesh, in fact, under the interim regime of Muhammad Yunus, has been courting China and attracting big investments. Reportedly, Bangladesh has invited China to take part in the rejuvenation of the Lal Manohar Air Base, which is near the strategic Siliguri corridor. Pakistan's military has been closely engaging with the interim regime and even the radical extremist forces. Top Pakistani army generals have been visiting Bangladesh. Pakistan Bangladesh direct trade through the sea route has resumed. Pakistani Navy is docking its vessels at Chittagong port in Bangladesh. ISI operatives have been spotted in the country. US presence is also growing considerably. American influence has also increased considerably in this vital region. So, at such a delicate moment, now India faces a very difficult choice because Bangladesh is demanding India to extradite Sheikh Hasina. See, according to Bangladesh, according to the perspective of the ICT, Sheikh Hasina is a sort of a criminal, right? A fugitive from the law. And India is sheltering this so called fugitive. So there is an extradition treaty between India and Bangladesh. India Bangladesh had signed an extradition treaty to extradite wanted criminals who are hiding in the other country. So, under the provisions of the treaty, there is indeed an obligation on both the parties to extradite wanted criminals, especially when they are convicted. So, now that Sheikh Hasina has been convicted, Bangladesh is highlighting the extradition treaty, bringing that pressure on India, pointing out that India has a responsibility to extradite Sheikh Hasina. But, however, this is unlikely to happen. India is not going to give up Sheikh Hasina. Sheikh Hasina and her whole family, her father Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, they've been great friends of India. They've stood for India's interests. In fact, when Bangladesh was liberated under the Bangabandhu, the father of Bangladesh, it was because of the leadership of Awami League and Sheikh Mujibur Rahman with the support of then Prime Minister Indira Gandhi, which made it possible. Indian diplomatic support, covert intelligence support, the eventual military engagement. So India has a lot of history with Sheikh Hasina's family. In fact, when Mujibur Rahman's family was assassinated, Sheikh Hasina largely grew up under India's protection. So India has that emotional, cultural bond as well with Hasina's family. And moreover, it's a matter of principle. Given that India doesn't have faith in the judicial process of the International Crimes Tribunal, We know the politics currently in Bangladesh. We know the rise of radicalism and extremism. There are elements waiting to target Sheikh Hasina. So it's unlikely that India is going to give up a friendly leader. India has reported on this development. India has reacted to it. India has said that we are watching the developments, but we will engage with all the stakeholders, keeping in mind the interests of people of Bangladesh. So it's a very carefully worded statement from India. It means that India is not going to look at the interests of Bangladeshi government. We will look at the interests of the people of Bangladesh. So if India believes that this trial was not a fair trial, we do have an option under the extradition treaty to refuse the extradition. Look at Article 8 of this extradition treaty between India and Bangladesh. Both parties have a right to refuse extradition if they believe that there is no good faith involved or the principles of justice have been compromised in a particular case, or if the matter involves military offenses which does not fall under your general civil and criminal offenses. So on these grounds, both parties can refuse to extradite a wanted criminal though they have been convicted by a court in the other country. So India is most likely to invoke this exemption, and India will refuse to extradite Sheikh Hasina. But will this create more anti-India sentiments? That is a bigger question that India should consider. Because right now there's a lot of popular sentiment against Sheikh Hasina. In fact, after this ruling by the International Crimes Tribunal, the youth came out on the streets calling for death penalty to Sheikh Hasina, calling for the execution of Sheikh Hasina. So currently, public sentiment is in favor of executing Sheikh Hasina. Now, will India fall for this pressure to protect its diplomatic ties, or will India give up a friend, a trusted partner? Right? It would be very interesting to watch what happens next. But India has said we will engage with all stakeholders, meaning the interim regime, all the different political parties. But also, please understand this is an attempt to crush the Awami League because Muhammad Yunus has announced elections next year. By March 2026, Bangladesh is supposed to see a fresh round of elections. So, this is a clear attempt to wipe out the opposition, to prevent Awami League from contesting, to ensure Sheikh Hasina cannot come back, return to the country, and participate in the elections. So, this could be a derailment of democratic processes. So this creates a difficult choice for India, but my gut feeling is most likely India will not extradite Sheikh Hasina. India will try to engage with Bangladesh. We will invoke this exemption, but it will be a difficult period for India-Bangladesh relationship. Coming to the next topic, a tragic development in Saudi Arabia. 45 Indian pilgrims who were part of the Hajj pilgrimage have unfortunately lost their lives in this tragic accident that has occurred near Jeddah. A bus carrying Indian pilgrims has collided with a oil tanker, resulting in a massive fire and explosion, and 45 Indian pilgrims have been killed. So this is an issue that is related to the well-being of the Indian community abroad. So this is a core interest, ensuring the safety of Indians, ensuring the safety of the Indian diaspora as well, is a core interest of India's foreign policy. Now, this topic will help you understand the role of Hajj pilgrimage in India's relations with Saudi Arabia. I'm sure all of you are aware that Saudi Arabia is home to two of the most sacred pilgrimage sites in Islam, Mecca and Medina. These are the top two holiest sites in Islam. First is Mecca, second is Medina. So, pilgrims from around the world visit Mecca, Medina as part of the Hajj Yatra, and Saudi Arabia facilitates this cultural exchange. And India, Saudi Arabia have a bilateral agreement in this regard. The government of India facilitates the Hajj pilgrimage. So we sign an agreement with Saudi Arabia to ensure a substantial quota is allocated to Indian nationals. As per the latest agreement, India has got a quota of 1,75,000 pilgrims with close to 1,40,000 seats going to the Hajj Committee of India and around 35,000 seats going to private Hajj group operators. So even for the next year, the agreement has been signed. So every year, India is sending around 175,000 pilgrims from the country. This is part of our close historical cultural links, religion based links that binds India and Saudi Arabia together. Now, can you tell me which is the third holiest site in Islam? First is Mecca, second is Medina. Which is the third holiest site in Islam? Please mention the answer in the comment section below. Next, the Supreme Court has passed an important ruling with regard to man animal conflict, especially in tiger reserves. The Supreme Court was hearing a matter of man animal conflict and environment conservation as far as the Jim Corbett National Park and Tiger Reserve is concerned in Uttarakhand. In this particular case, the Supreme Court has advised the states. It's an advisory which has been given to consider declaring incidents of man animal conflict as a natural disaster. Because with shrinking habitats, increasing deforestation, urbanization, it has led to more incidents of man animal conflict, especially with regard to tigers. The Supreme Court has advised the states to consider declaring incidents of man animal conflict as a natural disaster. Why? So that adequate compensation can be provided to the victims, those who lose their lives or those who get injured, those who lose their family members, or those who lose their agricultural crops or their cattle because of animal attacks, wild animal attacks. Compensating them is crucial, not only to look after the well being of the victims and their family, but also to ensure that the local community does not target the wildlife, be it elephants, be it leopards or tigers. When such losses are incurred, usually local community will start resenting the animal itself. They might try to target the animals. So to prevent that from happening, it's important to compensate the victims, right? And this in a way secures some justice to them. So declaring this as a natural disaster could potentially help in compensating the victims. So it's with that intention, the Supreme Court is advising the states to consider declaring man-animal conflict incidents as a natural disaster. It has also directed the state governments to implement the core buffer strategy of conservation in tiger reserves. See, under Project Tiger, which is implemented by the National Tiger Conservation Authority, the idea is to set up these tiger reserves as a protected area and to identify the core habitat and the buffer areas and to notify them. In the core area, human activities are completely prohibited. Even if there are human settlements, they are evicted and they are displaced and they are rehabilitated to the buffer zone or the contingent zones. And within the buffer zone, human activities are tightly regulated. So some states, though they have tiger reserves, they have not clearly notified the buffer and core areas. The Supreme Court has directed the states to quickly notify the core and buffer areas within the next 6 months. So clear deadline has been set. And to provide compensation, the Supreme Court has advised the states to rely upon a central sponsored scheme, the Integrated Development of Wildlife Habitats Scheme. It's a centrally sponsored scheme with funding from center and state. And the Supreme Court is directing the states to draw funds from this scheme to use it for dispersal in order to compensate the victims of man animal incidents. It has also directed state governments to act strictly against illegal encroachment in forest areas, in protected areas, to dismantle any illegal encroachment in construction, which could pose a threat to the sensitive environment and biodiversity of our forests. So these are some important observations that the Supreme Court has made in this particular case. Next, the Supreme Court is again in the news today with regard to the role of the Speaker. As you know, the Speaker of the House plays a critical role with regard to the 10th schedule of the Indian Constitution, also known as the anti-defection law. See, I would just like to give an update here. I'll not go into all the details of anti-defection law. So under the provisions of the 10th schedule, the Speaker of the House, be it the Lok Sabha or the State Assembly, is the final authority to decide upon disqualification of MLAs or the MPs, as the case may be, on the grounds of defection. On the grounds of defection, if disqualification proceedings are brought up, Speaker of the House will have to decide on the matter. So, in this regard, the Speaker assumes the role of a quasi judicial body. Speaker acts as a quasi judicial tribunal. Though the 10th schedule says that the ruling of the Speaker is full and final, though the 10th schedule provisions say that there's no scope for judicial review, Supreme Court has repeatedly pointed out that judicial review, which is part of the basic structure, cannot be overwritten by any constitutional amendment. So decision of the Speaker eventually is subjected to judicial review. But however, there is no deadline. There is no time frame under the 10th schedule within which the Speaker has to decide on disqualification matters. But many times we have seen this provision being misused, where speakers they sit on the decision to allow for toppling of governments and change of uh, elected governments in between the legislative period. They will sit on it till their office dies out naturally. That is, till the speaker steps down or the term of the speaker ends. So, this is something the Supreme Court is clearly against. Recently, in the month of July, a Supreme Court bench headed by Chief Justice of India, B.R. Gawai, has set a 3-month timeline within which speakers are supposed to decide on disqualification matters. So, in this particular case, which is related to the Assembly Speaker of Telangana, the 3-month period has already passed. That's why the Supreme Court has basically accused the Speaker of gross contempt of court, because the Supreme Court had set the 3-month duration as a deadline within which the Speaker had to take a decision on the disqualification of the MLAs. So, though the Constitution doesn't provide for the timeline, there's no deadline on when the Speaker should decide. The Supreme Court has recently brought out the 3-month rule. Now, coming to the prelim section, let's take a quick look at the smaller articles in the paper. Zonal councils are in the news. Home Minister Amit Shah has chaired a meeting of the Northern Zonal Council. So, what are these zonal councils? How many zonal councils are there? What is its composition? Which states are part of which zonal councils? These are some important facts for your prelims. Zonal councils have been set up mainly to achieve center state coordination and interstate coordination. They have been set up under the States Reorganization Act 1956. This law, which was based on the recommendations of Fazal Ali Commission, the States Reorganization Commission, led to the internal reorganization of India post independence. So, to resolve any differences between two states or two or more states, and to resolve any differences between the center and some of the states in a particular zone, in a particular region, these zonal councils have been contemplated. So, we have 5 zonal councils. There is a council for the northern states. There is the Southern Zonal Council for southern states. Similarly, for East and West. Then for Central India. And as well as there is a separate Northeast Zonal Council. So in total, you will get these 6 zonal councils. The zonal councils are chaired by the Home Minister. The Union Home Minister is the chairperson of each zonal council, be it the Northern Zonal Council, the Southern, Eastern, Western, Central, Northeastern Zonal Council. Union Home Minister will be the chairperson. Then it includes the chief ministers of the concerned states from the respective zones. Now, can you find out which states are part of which zones? Which states are part of Northern Zonal Council? Which states are part of the Southern Zonal Council? And of course, it includes union territories as well, right? So please find this out and mention that in the comments. So the concerned chief ministers, the governors, lieutenant governors are also invited to the meetings, and senior officials, like for example, the chief secretary of the concerned states, the Home Secretary, Finance Secretaries are also sometimes invited, and senior central government officials are also invited. And the vice chair position is taken by one of the chief ministers of the state on a rotational basis. Is that clear? For example, in Southern Zonal Council, the vice chair position will rotate between the CM of Tamil Nadu, CM of Kerala, CM of Karnataka, CM of Andhra Pradesh, and then Telangana. So it's on a rotational basis amongst the chief ministers of the concerned states. This creates a platform for center state coordination on a zonal basis and resolving interstate issues in that particular region. For example, in the Northern Zonal Council meeting, which took place, the Sutlej Canal issue, the SYL Canal dispute which has come up, was discussed in detail to resolve the differences between the concerned states. Rajasthan, Madhya Pradesh, your Punjab, Haryana, right? So this has been one of the updates, and the Delhi bomb blast was also discussed. The issues discussed here may not be relevant for us, but the composition, the role, that would be more important for the exams. Next, on page 11, the Hindu carries a detailed article on a legendary freedom fighter, a largely forgotten freedom fighter, Batukeshwar Dutt. We all remember Bhagat Singh, Rajguru, Sukhdev, right? They have been given the deserving credit for their immense contribution to India's freedom struggle, for their revolutionary idea against opposing colonialism, imperialism. But Batukeshwar Dutt's role has been largely sidelined. So Batukeshwar Dutt was born in 1910 in the Bengal province, in the Burdwan district. In 1929, when he was just 19 years old, he, along with Bhagat Singh, carried out one of the greatest revolutionary acts that the world has witnessed, not just India. Bhagat Singh and Batukeshwar Dutt, they went on to bomb the Central Legislative Assembly in Delhi, the Delhi Assembly bombing. Now, this incident was not meant to kill people. It was not meant to be a violent incident. It was a symbolic attempt, a symbolic revolutionary move. Because after dropping the bomb in the Legislative Assembly, Batukeshwar Dutt and Bhagat Singh would spread flyers, and the flyers were titled "To Make the Deaf Hear." The explosion was meant to create the sound to attract the attention of the deaf. The deaf were the colonial rulers. The deaf were, it was basically the British Empire. It was a symbolic attack, a symbolic message by a revolutionary group of leaders. Eventually, Bhagat Singh, then Rajguru Sukhdev, were delivered the death punishment for their revolutionary activities in 1931. But Batukeshwar Dutt would serve a long jail term. He was eventually released in 1938. 1938, he was released from custody. But Batukeshwar Dutt would not sit idle. He went on to participate in the Quit India movement in 1942. He was again jailed for several more years. By the time India achieved independence, Batukeshwar Dutt had spent several years in jail. Most of his prime age as a youth was spent in jail fighting for India's independence, setting an example for the country's youth. But what is unfortunate is that the country has largely forgotten his contribution post independence. The article points out that Batukeshwar Dutt doesn't get that amount of credit. In fact, he had to struggle in his life post independence. Though he is a celebrated freedom fighter, he has not received the right recognition. That is the core point of this particular article. So just remember the basic facts. That should be more than sufficient. Coming to the last article for today, the 16th Finance Commission, which is chaired by Arvind Panagria, has tabled its report. It has presented its report to the President of India. As per the constitutional mandate, the Finance Commission, the 16th Finance Commission, has submitted its final report to the President. So, what is the Finance Commission? Why is its role so important? See, the Finance Commission is a constitutional body provided under Article 280 of the Indian Constitution. It is set up once in 5 years by the President, which is essentially on the recommendations of the Council of Ministers headed by the Prime Minister, and it is given with a terms of reference. So the Financial Commission acts as a quasi-judicial body. It acts as an advisory body. And of course, it's a constitutional body. Its primary role is to decide upon the financial devolution in the country, to decide the division of tax revenues between union and states, what we call as vertical devolution of funds, and also to provide a formula for distribution of the tax revenue between the states, amongst the states, what we call as horizontal devolution. It also has a mandate to decide upon the grants in aid to states, especially those having a revenue deficit. It also decides upon measures to consolidate and strengthen the state consolidated fund to support local bodies, the panchayats and the municipal bodies. And recently, it has been given a new mandate to review disaster management funding, the disaster response fund, the disaster mitigation fund, and the distribution of these funds from center to states is now under the mandate of the Finance Commission and any other financial matter which can be referred to by the President. These are the matters that are taken up by the Finance Commission. It prepares a final report, submits to the President. And based on this, the government will implement the devolution plan. But these recommendations are not binding on the government. It's not binding on the President of India. But however, in most cases, the recommendations are accepted by the government. It's very rare for Finance Commission recommendations to not be accepted by the government. So please remember, it's not binding, but usually it is accepted. So this is what you need to know. We will get further details regarding what's there in the report in itself in some days maybe. And this would be implemented for the period 2026 to 2031. Is that clear? So on this note, I bring my session to an end. I hope you guys have understood all the topics. And if you like the session, do press the like button. And do let me know what you think about the session in your comments. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel. That is it. Thanks for watching.